Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. If you would like to become a patron of the podcast, we would love you to. You can do so for just a few cents per episode, and every little really helps us produce this podcast for you. Thank you to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, season 33, episode 8, Fix Bayonets, an heroic old-fashioned charge in the Korean War. This episode was written by Murray Darm. Murray is an ancient and medieval military historian from New Zealand living in Australia. He has written more than 100 articles on various aspects of ancient and medieval military history, as well as other historical topics from all periods, ranging from the history of opera to the runic alphabet and recipients of the Victoria Cross. He is author of Macedonian Phalangite versus Persian Warrior, Athenian Hoplite versus Spartan Hoplite, and Leuctra 371 BC, all from Osprey Publishing. He is a regular on the Ancient Warfare podcast and a regular writer for us here on the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. 1951 had begun disastrously for the United Nations forces in Korea. On December the 31st, 1950, the Chinese 13th Army breached UN defences below the 38th parallel as part of the third phase campaign, and on January the 3rd, Seoul was evacuated by the US 8th Army. The 8th Army was commanded by Lieutenant General Matthew B. Ridgeway, who had been in office for little over a week, taking up his command only on December 26, 1950. One of the regiments in the 8th Army was the 27th Infantry Regiment, the Wolfhounds, a name given to them by their Bolshevik enemies in Siberia when they served there in the Russian Civil War in 1918 to 1919. Less than 3 weeks after evacuating Seoul, Ridgeway, determined to improve morale, organised a reconnaissance in force, Operation Wolfhound, to be led by one corps, spearheaded by the 25th Infantry Division. The central force of this operation was the 27th Infantry Regiment, after whom the operation was named. The operation pushed north towards Seoul, with artillery and air support. The operation was an immense success, establishing a new front line. A new offensive operation, Thunderbolt, was then launched on January the 25th, and one corps advanced towards Suwon, 30 kilometres south of Seoul, taking it from the communist forces in one day. By January the 31st, the front line had advanced north of Suwon. On February the 4th, a general advance was ordered towards the south bank of the Han River, prioritising the taking of Incheon and Kimpo airfield. The enemy maintained resistance, delaying the advance with UN forces advanced minefields and destroyed bridges, but they seemed to be preparing for a major offensive on February the 8th, after the Chinese New Year, and perhaps on the birthday of the Korean People's Army. The strongest enemy positions were placed directly in the way of one corps' advance, centred on Kwanak Mountain, the last defensible heights before reaching Seoul. These positions were held in strength by the North Korean 47th Division, and towards them marched the men of the 27th Infantry Regiment. The 25th Infantry Division left Suwon on February the 3rd and marched 16 miles, 25 kilometres, to a point near Anyang. From there they proceeded to operate a series of patrol actions between February 4th and 10th. Several of these patrols were intended to attack smaller enemy strongholds during daylight hours. Commanding Company E, Easy Company, 2nd Battalion of the 27th Infantry Regiment, was 30-year-old Captain Lewis Millett, a veteran of several theatres in World War II, whose red handlebar moustache had led, unsurprisingly, to the nickname Red, although men who knew him called him Lou. On February the 7th, 1951, Millet's company was involved in just such a daylight patrol. Captain Millet was personally leading the 100 men of Easy Company in an attack on enemies positioned on Hill 180 near Somme Ni. The approach was from a smaller line of hills, and as he advanced he noticed that 1st Platoon was pinned down by machine gun and anti-tank fire. These were Russian 14.5mm PTRD 1941 anti-tank rifles known as buffalo guns and used for long-range sniping as well as taking out vehicles. Each North Korean division was equipped with 36 of the old but still deadly weapons. Gathering the men of 3rd Platoon, Millet went to the support of his 1st Platoon. He later recalled that he fixed his own bayonet and then ordered his men to fix bayonets and follow me. This would be the last recorded bayonet charge in American military history. The men charged up Hill 180, encouraged by Millet, shouting, "Grenades and cold steel!" As they approached the enemy positions, Millet saw the 14.5mm anti-tank nest and charged it himself, killing the 3-man gun crew with his bayonet. His citation for the Medal of Honor would claim he killed 2 men. It claimed that Captain Millet ordered the 3rd Platoon forward, placed himself at the head of the 2 platoons, and with fixed bayonet led the assault up the fire-swept hill. In the fierce charge, Captain Millet bayoneted 2 enemy soldiers and boldly continuing on, throwing grenades, clubbing and bayoneting the enemy, while urging his men forward by shouting encouragement. Millet then waved his men forward from the top of the hill and continued the attack with grenades and bayonets. Pictures of Millet at the time and in the life-size diorama of his action at the National Infantry Museum, Fort Benning, Georgia, show him with grenades attached to his harness. Once the North Korean commander was killed in this action, the remainder of the enemy, perhaps 200 men, broke and fled. His citation continued. His dauntless leadership and personal courage so inspired his men that they stormed into the hostile position and used their bayonets with such lethal effect that the enemy fled in wild disorder. The communist forces suffered 18 dead to the bayonets of Millet's company, while his company suffered 9 dead in the heroic attack. Another version of the engagement claims that 50 enemy were killed, 20 by bayonet. Millet would later claim that he had already led bayonet charges to take similar enemy strong positions in patrols on the 4th and 5th of February. This may have been part of General Ridgway's plan to re-instill morale in his men. Of the action, Millet later claimed that the Chinese had put out the word that we were afraid of bayonets. Americans afraid of bayonets is just ridiculous, I thought, so I intended to prove a point. Another version of this recollection is far more colourful. Millet told a different interviewer that we had acquired some Chinese documents, propaganda leaflets, stating that Americans were afraid of hand-to-hand fighting and cold steel. When I read that, I thought, I'll show you, you sons of bitches. Millet also claimed that the reason for his unit's success in their charge was that it was a composite unit made up of men from diverse ethnic backgrounds. I had a composite unit from every national group in the United States. We had black, white and brown. I would say typically American. And typically American, they took the objective, and typically American, they were very proud after it. Immediately after the enemy fled from Hill 180, Millet was wounded by grenade fragments hitting him in the shin, but he refused to be evacuated until the objective was secured. One version of events claimed Millet was wounded before he even charged. Historian of the US Army S.L.A. Marshall called Millet's charge the most complete bayonet charge by American troops since Cold Harbor, recalling the June 1864 battle during the US Civil War in Virginia. Marshall was himself present on the battlefield the day after Millet's charge and would write the recommendation for his Medal of Honor. Marshall called the location Anyang Ni. It would not be long before Millet was presented with his award, President Harry S. Truman presented it to him in July 1951. It was the pinnacle of a remarkable, in actual fact unique, military career, and one which continued until 1973. In all, Millett served for 35 years in the military. He enlisted in the Massachusetts National Guard when he was only 17, possibly as part of the 101st Artillery Regiment, in which his uncle had served in World War I. He then joined the Army Air Corps in 1940. When President Roosevelt announced in September 1940 that no American would fight on foreign soil, however, Millett deserted and travelled to Canada to enlist in the Canadian Army. In early 1941, he travelled to London as part of the Royal Regiment of Canadian Artillery, serving as a gunner, some accounts say radar operator, during the latter stages of the Blitz. When the USA entered the war, he went to the US Embassy and asked to be transferred to the US Army, joining the 27th Armoured Field Artillery Regiment, 1st Armoured Division, in 1942. He was involved in Operation Torch in Tunisia and was awarded the Silver Star. He received that award for his quick-thinking action when he jumped into a burning ammunition-filled half-truck and drove it away from Allied soldiers before jumping clear just before the vehicle exploded. Soon after that, he shot down a Messerschmitt Me-109, firing the machine gun mounted on a half-track and shooting the pilot through the cockpit in the process. Millett then joined the invasion of Italy at Salerno and then Anzio as a sergeant. In Italy, his 1940 desertion was uncovered and Millett was court-martialed and fined $52. In the field, he was soon promoted again and awarded a Bronze Star. In all, he spent 6 months in North Africa and 6 months in Italy. After his service in Korea, Millett graduated Ranger School at Fort Benning. He served with the 101st Airborne Division in the Vietnam War as an intelligence officer and was involved as an advisor in the Phoenix program, the controversial operation identifying Viet Cong sympathizers. He later went on to command a reconnaissance commando school to train small teams for covert actions in Vietnam at the Army Security Agency at Fort Devens, Massachusetts. Millett retired in 1973, having achieved the rank of colonel. In all, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, Silver Star, Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Legions of Merit, 3 Bronze Stars, 4 Purple Hearts, and 3 Air Medals. Every year on the anniversary of the Battle of Bayonet Hill, a commemoration is held by troops stationed at Osan Air Base, South Korea. It is one of the base's major annual events. Millett himself visited the base and joined in the commemorations on several occasions, beginning in 1975. A plaque within the base claims that the battle actually took place within the grounds of the airbase, although the site of the battle was actually some distance north of the base. The reasons for claiming the battle took place within the base are understandable, however, as is the esprit de corps the association encourages. Unfortunately, the original Medal of Honor record contained an error in its map reference number, allowing for confusion to creep in. What this mislocation also meant, however, was that the actual location of the battle was lost, that is, until 2018, when it was placed once more in its correct location by retired US Air Force Colonel David Murphy, although others argue for alternative locations. Murphy's investigations were not helped by the fact that Millett, on his visits to Osan Air Base, stated that Hill 180 within the airbase was the site of his action, and he would point out on his visits where part of his action occurred on the hill within the base. For this reason, Osan Air Base personnel have been unwilling to accept the revised location of the battle, even though it accords with official maps of the operation, which began north of the position of Osan, which itself is south of Suwon, where the 25th Infantry Division was on February the 3rd. We do not know if Millett misremembered the location of the battle. His first visit to Osan occurred in 1975, and it had been 24 years since the battle. It is possible that the hill there looked similar to the actual Hill 180 some 40 kilometres further north. Murphy speculated that Millett was taken to the wrong hill by his hosts and did not question them or the location. Millett's recollections across several visits then cemented the tradition that the hill was within Osan Air Base, and that was the site of the battle. That provided the personnel of the base all the proof they needed that the base contained the location of the battle, and that this tradition should not be questioned. Millett himself may have realised his mistake. In a 1993 interview he stated that the battle took place north of Osan, and in 1994 claimed to not remember the hill at all. Debate over the exact location of the battle should not, however, distract from the outstanding bravery of Millett's action. His death in 2009 has meant arguments continue. Millett's reflection on his lengthy service provides a better epitaph than debate on the location of the battle. I believe in freedom. I believe deeply in it. I fought in 3 wars and volunteered for all of them because I believed, as a free man, that it was my duty to help those under the attack of tyranny. Just as simple as that. Well, thank you once again, Murray, for another great episode. If you would like to write an episode for us, and we've had a few scripts in recently from some past contributors, and we're looking forward to bringing those to you. If you would like to write a script for us, drop us an idea. We'll work with you to get that done and to get your name in lights, as it were, on the podcast. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to become a patron, then please just go to patreon.com/The History Network and give whatever you can each episode as a pledge. We really appreciate it. And thank you once again for all those who are patrons and make this podcast possible. Thanks once again for listening. You've been listening to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast, written by Murray Dahm, read by Nick Barker.